Look at the sheer pageantry, the velvet robes, the golden regalia, an audience of millions watching a ritual that seems perfectly frozen in time. Today, the British monarchy is a highly televised institution defined by careful ceremony. But if you trace this institution back to its origins 1,000 years ago, you don't find crowns resting on velvet pillows. You find them being ripped from the dead in the mud. Over the last 1,200 years, 63 different monarchs have claimed this throne. While royal families across the rest of Europe ended their reigns in violent uprisings and beneath the blade of the guillotine, the British crown somehow survived. The earliest kings didn't rule by divine right or public consent. They were nation builders who held power through one very simple mechanism: raw physical force. Take Alfred the Great in the 9th century. He literally carved out the boundaries of an Anglo-Saxon kingdom by repelling relentless Viking invasions with his armies. 2 centuries later, William the Conqueror secured his rule over England with an equally aggressive tactic. He commissioned the Doomsday Book, a massive nationwide census recording every piece of land, livestock, and property in the country. This functioned as a brutal ledger designed for total wealth extraction, allowing the Norman king to enforce complete feudal dominance over his new subjects. Yet if the monarchy had relied entirely on raising armies and seizing land, it would have collapsed centuries ago. The British crown outlived its rivals by knowing exactly when and how to give that physical power away. Military dominance is expensive and exhausting. As society grew more complex, the threat of a sword was no longer enough to maintain control over an entire country. The crown needed a less volatile way to centralize authority. Rulers like Henry II began moving the battlefield into the courtroom. By establishing trial by jury and standardizing common law, Henry integrated the state into the daily lives of his subjects. The king evolved from a military commander into the ultimate judge. Still, as the centuries passed, even legal authority faced challenges. To prevent rivals from questioning their legitimacy, monarchs required an unassailable mandate. Henry VIII secured that mandate by breaking ties with the Catholic Church in Rome. Declaring himself the supreme head of the newly formed Church of England, he fused the political power of the state with absolute spiritual authority. His daughter, Elizabeth I, adapted the crown's influence further. Inheriting a nation fractured by religious conflict, she used careful diplomacy and heavily sponsored a cultural renaissance to forge a unified, fiercely proud national identity. This timeline tracks the explosion of English maritime trade routes starting in the late 16th century, plotted against the era's major cultural milestones. The state's global reach and cultural output surged simultaneously under her watch. By pivoting their mandate from brute force to legal structure and spiritual leadership, these rulers successfully updated the function of the crown. They managed to govern a society that had completely outgrown the need for a warrior king. But this delicate balance between the monarch and the people eventually faced its ultimate test right here, within the walls of Parliament. In the 17th century, Charles I ascended to the throne holding an unwavering belief in the divine right of kings. He was convinced his authority came directly from God, leading to a complete refusal to compromise with a parliament that demanded a voice in governance. That refusal pushed the nation over the edge. The resulting political deadlock erupted into the English Civil War, pitting the king's forces directly against his own people. The conflict ended in a way that shocked the entire European continent. In 1649, Charles was tried for treason and executed. The idea that a monarch was legally untouchable was permanently broken. For the next decade, Oliver Cromwell governed as Lord Protector over a newly declared republic. Though short-lived, this experiment proved the state could function without a king, shifting how the British public viewed the distribution of power. The brutal lesson of the 17th century was clear. The crown could never again hold unchecked authority. If the monarchy was going to return, it would have to rule with the explicit consent of the public. When the monarchy was finally restored, it stepped back into a very different world. To ensure they didn't meet the same fate as Charles I, the royals had to deliberately step away from the political levers of the state. By the 19th century, Queen Victoria redefined the job entirely. As Britain went through the massive upheaval of the Industrial Revolution, she positioned the monarchy as a steady moral anchor and a highly visible ceremonial figurehead. This map shows the sheer geographic scale of the British Empire at its peak, spanning continents and oceans. The crown was no longer managing the daily politics of this vast territory. It was exerting a powerful, unifying soft power over a quarter of the globe. A century later, Queen Elizabeth II took this concept of the royal figurehead into the mass media age. Over her 70-year reign, she brought the institution into millions of living rooms. She guided the country through the immense transition from an empire into a voluntary commonwealth. Instead of wielding political control, she provided a constant, reliable symbol of national continuity during decades of rapid global change. Today, King Charles III navigates the 21st century under those same constraints. He reigns, but he does not rule. Instead, he channels the influence of the crown into advocacy for environmental conservation and social initiatives. The British monarchy didn't survive by stubbornly clinging to the swords and battlefields of its past. It survived through a masterful, centuries-long evolution, trading absolute power for cultural influence and transforming from warlords into the living symbols of a nation's identity.